Hello, Seattle. I'm your host, Zach McDonald.
And I'm your host, Dan Keller.
And we're excited to be back with another episode of Hello, Seattle. We're going to kick off season 2 here with a little update on the Seattle housing market and some predictions for 2025. Dan, do you want to talk just a little bit about the mortgage market? I think mortgages have been a huge piece, and the mortgage rates have been a huge piece of why the housing market has been so volatile here over the past few years. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, we're going on almost 3 years now of economists and experts saying that low rates are on the horizon, right? You know, hey, this is the year, or by Q2, rates are going to drop. So, you know, I hate to be the bearer of bad news. I don't think it's bad news, but mortgage rates are not going to drop to, you know, back down to the lows that everyone wants in 2025. It's just not going to happen. It was supposed to happen in 24. It was supposed to happen in 23.
I know.
And
still here.
You know, and there was some, you know, in 23, let's give us some perspective real quick. In 23, it was inflation. They needed to get inflation under control.
Yep.
You know, and so the focus was on the Fed rate. That didn't really work. So they needed another year to do that. And so then they focused on working on that in 2024. They thought they had it under control. Rates started to drop. We saw that. In fact, they started to drop, and we started seeing really good improvements around September of 2024. And then boom, we had another report come out, showed inflation, and rates went back up. And so, you know, we've got to look at inflation. I don't think they have it under control. No. So we got to keep an eye on that. But we got to really got to keep an eye on jobs. So two components of jobs: job losses and new jobs created. So you have to understand, economically speaking, when the Fed raises the Fed rate, the cost of borrowing money like they have, they do that to constrict the economy. That also constricts large businesses from growing, expanding, hiring, being innovative. Now, the pink elephant in the room, Trump got elected, okay? So everyone thinks that Trump's going to come in and save mortgage and save real estate. Well, real estate and mortgage doesn't need to be saved, number one. It's just higher rates.
Yeah, okay? It's just higher rates.
It's just higher rates. What needs to be worked on is we got to figure out this inflation thing, because it's crushing, absolutely demolishing the middle to middle upper class. Okay, people on fixed incomes, people that are making $10,000, $12,000 a month household income. When you make a fixed amount of money, regardless if it's 10, 15, 20,000, I don't care what it is a month.
The more expensive your housing is, the harder it is.
Well, you got housing, the cost of living, and gas, and all these things. So I think they're going to start working on that. I keep telling people, I think by 2026, they're going to start working on the housing market. What I mean by the housing market, you're going to talk a little about this. We'll do a podcast later on this. Normal housing cycles. You have people exiting the housing market, older people, downsizers, right? And then you have people, we work with a lot of these people, these younger people out of college, getting their first jobs, buying their first home. That cycle has been truncated because there's a lot of the people that would have exited over the last couple of years aren't.
They haven't exited.
They haven't exited because they've got low 30-year fixed rates, because of affordability. It doesn't make sense to downsize and pay more money, right?
Yeah.
So they'll be working on that over the next year or two. I don't think that's going to be 2025. So I can get into predictions here in a minute, and these are going to be data-driven predictions, but that kind of gives you a little bit of perspective of what we've been dealing with over the last few years.
Yeah, and what do you think is going to cause someone to decide to sell their house? Somebody that's maybe hasn't downsized yet, or hasn't sold a house after they bought their next one. Maybe they're holding on to it still because of the lower rates.
You know, it's going to be that trade-off conversation, Zach. It's going to be the trade-off conversation that I have a 3% 30-year fixed rate right now. And what am I willing to exchange that for? So a lot of economists, I've ran a lot of numbers, and this is the other cool thing. I do a lot of volume, mortgage volume. So I have a lot of these side-by-side conversations, comparisons with clients. I think it's going to take right around that 5% mark. 5%. For someone to give up a 3 for a 5, maybe even lower. They can pay some points, but you know, that may never happen as well. So, you know, we don't know, but it's something. The conversation I'm having with people is we got to zoom out. You have to zoom out for a moment. Does this house fit your budget? Even if you have to tighten some things up, can you afford it? Yes or no? Does it meet your needs, your goals? And then financially speaking, by making this move, 10 years, 15, 20 years down the road, does it get you closer to where you want to be? And that's financial freedom or retirement.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, let's talk about the housing market a little bit and what's been going on. If we look at King and Snohomish County over the last year, we saw improvement in a lot of different ways, even with all the ups and downs in the mortgage market. I feel like mortgage rates have gone like this the last couple of years. Thankfully, they've been at a lower variable this year. If we look at Snohomish County, we see that the amount of new listings increased 13.8%. That's pretty sweet, Dan. We saw 5.1% more pending sales, and we saw 6.9% more closed sales. So we saw more activity in 2024 than we did last year, which is encouraging. If we look at the median sales price, 6.8% up year over year and 8.1% for the average. So in Snohomish County, we saw that even with the higher rate environment, we saw housing prices in general increasing in Snohomish County. And we saw a very similar trend in King County with an increase in new listings, pending sales, closed sales. And we saw 8.5% up year over year for the median sales price and 9.6% up year over year for the average sales price. So in both cases, the housing market has been getting better and closer to those record highs that we saw a couple years ago in spite of the higher rates. And I think a lot of that has to do with inventory. There just haven't been enough houses out there on the market. We didn't see a flood of houses. In fact, we saw fewer people selling their houses, as you were talking about. Even with fewer people buying, it's been more difficult for people to afford houses. We just haven't seen a flood of listings to oversaturate the market. And even as we wrap up the month, King and Snohomish County, we're at 1 month of supply in King County and 0.9 months of supply in Snohomish County. We're right in the wheelhouse for multiple offers, competitive offer situations.
So still a seller's market.
Market.
Yep.
We did have, I would say this year we had a little bit of a buyer's market in the late fall. There was a couple months of inventory, houses that had been sitting on the market, and we saw, and I would almost argue it was a seasonal buyer's market, right? It wasn't necessarily a long-lasting buyer's market. There are a couple months where if you bought, you're able to negotiate the price down.
Yeah, and also too, you got to understand too, Zach, sellers have been conditioned for so long that I'm going to put my house on the market, and within a week or so, I'm going to have offers, right? And so in the back of their mind, they've been conditioned to that. Even their professional realtor like you is going to be like, well, it's probably expect 25 to 35 days. So motivation, increased levels of motivation I've seen in our office. We did a lot of 2-1 buy downs this year. Those are seller paid 2-1 buy downs. Those require a seller credit. So even though on paper, the economy and the market's acting like a seller's market, we did see some advantages for buyers, meaning some closing cost credits or maybe, at list price or maybe even a little bit below. But yeah,
I had some clients do that too, right? So you could do the buy down or you can negotiate the lower price. Usually you're not getting both. So you can either have the lower payment for a year or two, or you can have the lower price. And so I think people pulled those different levers depending on, buyer and seller needs and wants.
Because a 2-1 buy down is approximately 2.5%, of the, the loan amount. So that's a decent credit.
Oh, it's a huge credit. And sometimes you get even more off the price. Just it sounds easier for the seller, even though it costs them more money at the end of the day. Let's talk about pricing a little bit. So Zillow is predicting nationally 2.6% or so increase in home values. Redfin is right around 4%. And they're saying a lot of the things we just said here, right? Higher interest rates, the low amount of inventory. I don't think anybody's expecting that all of a sudden everybody's going to sell their houses. The reason people haven't sold, as you mentioned earlier, is still going to be around. Rates are still going to be higher. And I think locally speaking, we're going to see prices continuing, I would argue, similarly to what we saw this year. I think we can expect to see somewhere in that 8 to 10% range in King and Snohomish County again this year. And that's been pretty consistent when the market's been decent or even better. I don't think we're going to see a 20%. Those are some crazy numbers that we saw for a few years. But I wouldn't be surprised to see somewhere in that 8 to 10% range again. I don't know about you.
Yeah, it's really hard, Zach, to talk with clients about, the economy being challenging and it being tough when you're seeing real estate appreciating at 8 to 10%. You're seeing the S&P 500 index. You and I are both heavily invested in the stock market, and our portfolios are teens to 20s. I was north of 20 this year.
I was over 20% too.
So it's like 20+% return on investment in the stock market, 8 to 10% in real estate. It's got all the signs of a thriving, flourishing market, right? Economy, but it's just the cost of things are just so crippling. So
yeah, I hear that.
But it's important to understand those metrics, I think, too. When you got the naysayers that are like, oh, it's crashing, or oh, this or that. When you understand the data, if you qualify for the home, if it meets your needs, buy the home. If it's going to go up, if you're going to buy a $800,000 home and it's going to go up at 8%, that's $60,000+ you just earned in 1 year.
Yeah, I think
ownership.
Blake Shelton has a song where he says "one more, one last time." Okay? And I think this year is that one more, one last time for getting a house below the peak prices, because at some point the housing market is going to be addressed. I think the general economy, the stock market is going to be addressed. Inflation this year as a priority would be my guess. I think you have the same guess, and so do a lot of economists. I think the housing market would then be the next thing that is addressed. And so once that's addressed, housing market addressed next, I think this year is going to be that year where, rates are still going to be higher, but there is an opportunity still with the prices. There is a very easy correlation to higher prices with lower rates. And we've had multiple clients this year buy thinking eventually that's coming down down the pike. It hasn't happened yet, but this is that last chance, I think. I think it's also a last chance. If right now, if you're somebody who's renting, you have a lot of negotiation power too, right? And so people that have been renting, there have been people holding off because it hasn't made sense to buy versus rent, right? Maybe you're not sure if you're staying, you're thinking maybe you're going to move away. People have been erring towards, a couple years, maybe I should just rent. If you made a decision to stay, this would be the time to capitalize on that decision now instead of continuing to wait it out, I would say, too.
So remember this, you guys. There's 3 factors that move interest rates. There's 3 big factors that move interest rates. Number 1 is the economy, okay? Data-driven economics, okay? How good the U.S. economy and global economy is moving. Number 2, natural disasters, okay? Global disasters, natural disasters, wars, stuff like that. Number 3, the government. The government can actually purchase mortgage-backed security, mortgage bonds, and that will artificially lower. That's what you saw during COVID. So don't think that that's not on the table right now for later in 2025 and 2026. And that's where the government can come in and artificially manipulate the market to kind of like reset that housing cycle that we talked about. So we're gonna talk about that later in the year. We'll give more commentary on that. But for right now, let me wrap with mortgage rate predictions.
Yeah, let's do it.
Want to do that?
Yep.
So like I said earlier, I hate to be a spoiler, kind of like not kind of anticlimactic, if you will, but
Dan Downer
here, but Dan's just real. And I'm very conservative when I give financial and mortgage rate data. So right now, 30-year fixed rates, we are in January of 2025. We're right at 7%. Like you can pay a little bit of points and get under, depending on the loan program, depending on the down payment, depending on the credit score. But let's just go to Mortgage News Daily. 7.14% today is the average 30-year fixed rate in America. Let's do this. Let's go back a year ago, 1 year ago, December 2023. Interest rates, 30-year fixed rates, average 30-year fixed rate in America, 7.08. So we're right there.
Yep.
Now,
said that on my other update too.
There you go. So then the previous peak, let's talk about the big, how mortgage rates moved. The previous peak, so maximum, October 2023, we're at 8%. So grateful, we're not in the 8s, okay? Grateful that year over year, we're about the same. Now, let's talk about the recent low that we saw, September 2024. So just a few months ago, like I said, inflation was coming down. Everything was looking good. Mortgage rates dropped to 6.1% for about 1 week.
That was a good week, though.
We had about 10 days. And then, boom, right back up to 6.5. Boom, right back up to 6 3/4. I would say the majority of the year we spent in the upper 6s is what I saw. 6.7, 6.8, down to maybe 6.6 a little. up over 7%. But as you can see what I just said, and I'm going to put this up on, if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see this infographic of this kind of like perspective of what rates did over the last year, where they're at. But let's go with some predictions, not by Dan Keller, but these are Realtor.com, National Association of Realtors, Zillow, and then MBS Highway. MBS Highway is a service that I pay a lot of money for. I think they're the most accurate. Year over year, they're the most accurate, so I'll close with them. But they're saying 1 year from now, they're expecting 30-year fixed rates. Realtor.com, 6.25%. Okay, not bad. NAR, same thing. They're saying, quote unquote, near 6%. So they're not wanting to give a number, but low sixes. Okay, maybe
Fair.
even upper fives, they're saying. Zillow doesn't want anything to do with the predictions yet. Okay, they want to stay out of the game.
NA? Is that their answer? NA.
That's NA, right? And then MBS Highway, where I, again, put a lot of faith in this one. They're saying 5.75%. So the general consensus year over year, maybe in the lower sixes, knocking on the door of the upper fives, which would be awesome. But don't hold your breath for that. What I would say, this is what I'm telling realtors, what I'm telling clients, 30-year fixed rates, mid sixes plus or minus a quarter. Probably going to see almost the same we saw in 2024, maybe just a tick lower. But right now, we're at 7.
So it sounds like both you and I and the other supposed experts
Yep.
are all kind of on the same page.
Yep.
We're going to be having a housing market look very similar to what it's looked like
Yep.
over the past year. And a lot of that has to do with mortgage rates remaining in the same general vicinity as they have over the past year.
Yep.
Cool.
We'll bring you a lot more information on this year, but for now, I think that was tight. That was that was a really good market prediction for Snohomish and King. I think rates are more national, but this is what I'm educating my clients on. Like I said, if you can afford the home, if it fits in your timeline, if it fits in your budget, and if it solves the needs for you and your family, it's a great time to buy real estate. Can't argue with 8% returns.
Yeah, you can't. Well, goodbye, Seattle.